Connecticut's Route 8 is a 70-mile state highway that runs north-south from the Long Island Sound to Massachusetts state line. Less than 30 miles north of Bridgeport is the town of Waterbury, Connecticut. Known as Brass City, it was the leading producer of brassware in the country for the first half of the 20th century. For the last several decades, it has been the hunting ground of the Route 8 serial killer, who has been targeting female sex workers and drug addicts. 19 women have been slain over the course of the last 34 years, butchered and bludgeoned, and many of their bodies were later recovered off Route 8 in Campville, a wooded and remote stretch of road near the border of Harwinton and Litchfield. This area has been nicknamed the Forgotten Valley by a local historian. It is accessible by traveling along Route 8 and taking exit 41. Navigating the back roads and dense wood, there used to be a rest stop here that served as a rendezvous. It has since been locked up and fenced off. It remains a spot for sex workers and their clients, drug addicts and their suppliers. Some believe this is just a convenient remote area for unassociated predators, but others believe Route 8 has become a dump site for one or more serial killers. Karen Everett grew up in Waterbury. She spent a short time away living in Virginia, but she eventually moved back, and in 1988 she was just shy of her 25th birthday. She grew up with the family nickname Bucky because of the size of her front teeth when she was little. She was the daughter of a wealthy Virginia family, and she had a bright future that had been corrupted by drugs. She was hooked on heroin, and to feed her addiction, she was a sex worker downtown. However, she also worked nearby at a real estate company during the day. The body of Karen Everett was discovered just 6 days after her 25th birthday in a wooded area off Valley Road near exit 41 on Route 8. Her body had cuts and bruises, apparently from tumbling down a nearby slope. She was unclothed except for a gray tank top. Police would later determine the cause of death was strangulation. However, they believed the crime itself took place in a different location, and her body had only been dumped in the area. 2 months later, on January 20th, 1989, police were contacted by an anonymous caller who stated that another body could be found in the area where Everett had been recovered. After an overnight search, police discovered the body of Mildred Alvarado, a 30-year-old mother of 4. She was located on the eastern bank of the Naugatuck River in a wooded area off Valley Road. She had been dumped in nearly the same spot, and she shared the same cause of death: strangulation. She was recovered wearing a black sweatshirt with the Playboy logo, jeans, and a denim vest. Her shoes were never found. Alvarado had been living with her boyfriend and 2 sons, soliciting sex work to make ends meet. Her neighbors complained of heavy traffic to her unit, and she was eventually evicted for failing to pay rent. Her sons were sent away to relatives, and she began sleeping in a junked white Fiat behind the apartment building. Police would later discover the identity of the anonymous caller and rule out any involvement. Later in '89, authorities were reluctant to admit a connection between the 2 crimes, but it was difficult to deny. The 2 women lived 1 mile apart in northeastern Waterbury. Both were sex workers, drug addicts, and loners. They had both been strangled and dumped off of Valley Road. These 2 murders were not handled by Waterbury police. Because the bodies were dumped in Campville, this was the jurisdiction of the smaller Harwinton PD, who called the Western District State Police for help. Officials from nearby Massachusetts began investigating the two murders under the speculation that they were connected to 6 others being investigated in their jurisdiction. They were thought to be the victims of a serial killer. 20 years later, investigators reported to Alvarado's surviving daughter that a small amount of DNA had been recovered from the scene. It has been 13 years since this update, and yet the DNA results have never been released. Evelyn Bettencourt was a 27-year-old mother of 4, and she was 3 to 5 months pregnant in early 1993. She had a significant crack cocaine drug habit, and she became a sex worker to afford her fix. However, her sister described her as cautious about the men she worked with. She had established a record of repeat customers and kept their names in a small book. She rarely strayed from this clientele. Bettencourt worked the north end of downtown, where crime and drug use were prevalent. Her body was found in the same forest off Valley Road. Nearby sex workers were interviewed, and they reported that Bettencourt was seeing a blonde man around the time of her disappearance. Police initially believed she had been struck and strangled, like Everett and Alvarado. However, the cause of death was later ruled to be a gunshot wound to the head. Bettencourt had bit her attacker and ripped hair from his head. This DNA evidence would prove critical. Shockingly, 2 short years later, Michael Curry would confess to friends over beers that he had been dumped by his girlfriend on Christmas Eve in '92 and vowed to exact revenge on another woman. Curry randomly selected Bettencourt in the hillside section of Waterbury. In his confession, Curry claimed that he drove Bettencourt to an abandoned Watertown drive-in where he shot her 4 times with his father's gun and dumped her body in Campville. Curry was ruled out as a suspect for the murders of Everett and Alvarado. While the murder of Evelyn Bettencourt was solved via confession, it drew attention to the Route 8 dumping grounds and suggested that more than one killer could be active in the area. In 1992, the Connecticut Homicide Task Force was created to investigate 19 unsolved killings of women. The task force assembling their caseload based on 3 criteria. The victims were killed in one location and dumped in another. The victims were sex workers and/or involved with illegal narcotics. The bodies of the victims were discovered nude or partially nude. Unfortunately, another victim would be added to the list just 1 year later. Olga Maria Cornieles-Ubiera was a 32-year-old woman who lived in a 3rd-floor inner-city walk-up on Fairview Street in downtown Waterbury. She lived less than a mile away from the other women. Ubiera was Dominican, and her ability to read English was hurting her job prospects. She wanted work and a safer apartment, but was struggling. She disappeared on October 29, 1994, and she wouldn't be found until 2 days later. Her body was recovered on November 1st on Route 262, just off Route 8 near Campville. She was just 20 feet from the shoulder of the road. She was nude, resting in a bush near a shallow gravel pit, and she had been mutilated with a sharp object or knife, excising tissue from her chest. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, and the Hartford Courant reported that she was likely struck by a vehicle. Ubiera stands out from the other women. She was not a sex worker or a drug user. Divers combed the Naugatuck River, but they uncovered no evidence. A shoe was found near the victim's body. Searchers continued along the shoulders of the road, but they never recovered her clothing or purse. The only item nearby was a beeper that Ubiera's boyfriend had given her to stay in touch. Frederica Spinola, 40, was a mother who worked the streets of Waterbury to pay for her drug habit. Spinola lived at 498 West Main Street, less than a half a mile away from Ubiera. She had been charged with narcotics possession in 1990 and prostitution in 94. In 1993, she had been interviewed by Robert Muldoon with the Waterbury Observer, and she told him, "Nothing scares me. I wouldn't be out here if it did. I got me a habit and I'm going to stay out until I die." On December 9th, 1994, she was picked up by a 77-year-old driver for Kelly Transit. The man had met her at a McDonald's in Waterbury. The driver's name was Albert Boyson, and he was driving a 1991 GMC van. Newspaper reports indicate that Spinola fell or jumped from the vehicle at 45 or 50 miles an hour. Boyson later told reporters that as he and Spinola passed the Harwinton sign on Route 8, Spinola began to panic and act erratically before eventually jumping from the moving vehicle. Boyson pulled to the side of the road to help, but Spinola was struck by a second car that fled the scene. As other traffic steered clear, Boyson pulled Spinola to safety on the side of the road. She later succumbed to her injuries at the hospital. While Boyson was questioned that night, he was quickly let go. The driver of the second vehicle was later identified as Andrew Keene, and he was charged with negligent homicide. Although the case is solved and no longer being investigated, it's an unsettling coincidence that another sex worker with a drug addiction ended up in a vehicle passing through Campville and mysteriously jumped to her death so close to the dumping grounds of several others just like her. Lori Delgado was a 41-year-old woman with a past conviction of prostitution in Waterbury. She was reportedly abducted around 2 a.m. on August 20th, 1995. Her body was discovered that afternoon on an embankment off Notch Road, less than 10 miles from Route 8. She had been stripped, and the cause of death was ruled to be blunt force trauma to the head. A conference was held to declare that investigators were uncertain if this was the work of suspected serial killers in the area. The Cheshire PD would later turn the case over to Connecticut State Police, who remain the primary investigators. One reason they may be reluctant to include Delgado with the others is that the cause of death differs. Many of those already discussed were strangled, stabbed, or shot, and Delgado was bludgeoned, which implies a more disorganized killer. However, it could have been the same unidentified subject who simply lost his temper or lost control. According to a 1995 newspaper article, investigators targeted a man digging up parts of his yard and seizing some belongings as part of a search. However, he was never named as a suspect. No additional updates have been made public. In February 1989, Elizabeth Grzywacz was a 21-year-old sex worker in downtown Waterbury. She was physically assaulted by a rough client. Initially, investigators on the task force believed they may have had one of the Route 8 serial killers captured from this altercation. However, he was later cleared of that suspicion. Tragically, this would not be the only time Grzywac's name was associated with the attacks in Waterbury. In 2002, she was staying at 69 Linden Street downtown. The building was abandoned, but the owner was letting her stay there for free in exchange for doing janitorial work. She was found dead due to blunt force trauma, and she was nude when she was discovered. However, little else has been published about Grzywacz. Similar to the attack on Lori Delgado, blunt force trauma does not match the MO of the suspected attacker. No official statement has been made by law enforcement. Jessica Muskus was the daughter of a heroin addict. She was removed from her childhood home in 1992 and spent over a year in the custody of the state. In 2004, Muskus already had a daughter of her own. Her mother had found sobriety, but their childhood home had left scars. Some sources report that Jessica Muskus was a drug user. Their family home was located in the Bunker Hill residential district, just across the Naugatuck River from where many of the other victims worked and lived. On September 2, 2004, Jessica Muskus was reported missing by her mother. She was last seen in the early morning hours, leaving the home to visit a friend. She would remain missing for 2 years. Then, her skeletal remains would be recovered off Route 8. Her skull was found at the bottom of a steep embankment near Exit 41. It appeared as though her body may have been tossed or dragged into the ravine. Because her skull had been separated from her body, some suspected her corpse had been mutilated, similar to the case of Ubiera. A month prior to her death, Linda reported that Jessica had been in a fight with a man. She had pulled a knife at the time to protect herself, but she feared the man would retaliate. His name was never disclosed. Brianna Beam was born to an underaged and negligent mother who had several children after her. As the oldest, she was often expected to caretake for the others, and she received punishment if she didn't. Her mother abused drugs, spent time in and out of jail, and neglected her 6 kids. Beam was removed from the care of her mother and placed in a foster home in Rhode Island. When she turned 18, she struck out on her own. Beam chose Waterbury, Connecticut because of the affordable rent. Her grandmother kept tabs on her through Facebook, and she began to notice pictures of Beam smoking and drinking. Beam had sworn to be straight edge after seeing what drugs had done to her mother, but that looked to no longer be the case, and things would only continue to worsen. In 2020, she called her grandmother to ask for money. She had become addicted to heroin and wanted to go into rehab. Her grandmother sent funds, and the requests for more only continued. Eventually, her grandmother refused to send any additional money. As a result, contact between the two abruptly stopped. When she received no updates or contact attempts from Beam after several months, the grandmother contacted the police and placed a missing persons report. In December 2021, Beam's remains were recovered from an embankment off Valley Road beside Route 8. She was identified via dental records. She was just 20 years old. The FBI and Connecticut State Police have united on the investigation into her murder. However, they have yet to release any details about the case. Many have concluded the Route 8 murders are the work of multiple unrelated killers. The area is isolated and well-trafficked by those involved in drugs and sex work. It may only be an opportune place for attackers to attempt to hide the evidence of their crimes. However, in the decades since the commission of these murders, several theories have indicated other possible perpetrators. Many have suggested the uncaught New Bedford Highway Killer, who was active in Massachusetts around 150 miles from this stretch of Route 8. He was believed to be responsible for the slayings of at least 9 women in 1988 and 1989. While a full exploration of the New Bedford Highway Killer is beyond the scope of this video, it's worth noting the similarities in victimology and timeline. Shockingly, the victim profile is nearly identical. He targeted women who were sex workers and drug addicts. They were clustered geographically, and they were strangled and assaulted, their bodies left in forested land beside well-traversed roadways. Although they were picked up in New Bedford, they were left alongside roads in neighboring towns, implying that the perpetrator was comfortable with travel. While the New Bedford Highway Killer shares many similarities, there are some differences. These bodies were transported farther distances, and they were often secured deeper into the wooded landscape. While many of the women along Route 8 were found less than a day later, these victims went undiscovered for weeks and even months. This implies that the new Bedford killer was more cautious and organized than the Route 8 serial killer. Others have suggested that the previously captured Connecticut serial killer William Devin Howell may have been responsible for the murders. Howell grew up in Harwinton, close to the dump site off Route 8. He was a drug user who frequently abused crack cocaine. In 2003, he traveled through central Connecticut, living in his 1985 blue Ford Econoline van, bouncing between menial jobs like landscaping. Howell was wanted by the police in 2003 for failure to meet with his parole officer. He should have been behind bars already for this violation, but he was difficult for the state to locate. Police visited his girlfriend, Dorothy Holcomb, where they found a van matching the description of a vehicle related to the disappearance of a missing woman, ᴘᴜᴅᴏᴛ. Arizmendi was last seen entering the vehicle to purchase drugs in June. Police saw a man in the window at the Holcomb residence. When they returned to the precinct, they found a picture of Howell, and it matched the man they had seen. However, Howell was not apprehended until 2 weeks later in North Carolina. He was sentenced to 6 months for his parole violation. When police searched his vehicle, they found a large amount of blood. Police also found 6 videotapes of bizarre and explicit activity. These tapes were poorly lit, and the subjects could not be identified. The DNA lab processed the evidence, and in September 2004, they confirmed it was the blood of Arizmendi. They found additional blood that had soaked through the carpet into the plywood of the van, identifying a second victim. However, police never recovered a body, and Howell was only convicted of manslaughter for a 15-year sentence. Howell became friends with another inmate, Jonathan Mills. During their time together, Howell confessed his other murders, relishing in the details. Mills informed the police, drawing a map to the location of several additional bodies that would be located behind a shopping mall in Hartford. Howell's crimes had begun much earlier that year in 2003. His first victim was Melanie Camillini, a 29-year-old woman who disappeared from Waterbury. Her mailing address was in the neighboring town of Seymour, where she lived with her mother, who said Camillini was artistic, creative, and intelligent. Camillini was a mother of 2, and she had a history of drug use, with a conviction in 2000 for possession of narcotics. Law enforcement told journalists that she may have worked as an escort. In an interview with author Ann Howard, Howell claimed to have abducted Camillini in the area of Grove Street in Waterbury on the first Saturday of February 2003. He offered her money for services and she agreed. Afterward, he duct taped her hands, feet, and mouth, pushing her to the back bench of the van. He assaulted her that night and the next morning before strangling her. 4 months later, on May 15, 2003, Howell picked up his second confirmed victim, Marilyn Gonzalez. She was a 26-year-old mother of 2, a Hispanic woman with dark brown eyes and a tattoo on her right shoulder with the letters A and T. She lived in a home on Hillside Avenue. Howell drove the same blue van down Grove Street in Waterbury, and he propositioned Gonzalez in the early morning. He bound her in the back bench seat of his van and assaulted her in several secluded locations until mid-afternoon, when he took her to a McDonald's drive-thru. He kept the music loud to mask any cries for help. When he tried to strangle Gonzalez, Howell said it took too long, so he used a hammer. Disturbingly, he wrapped the body and kept it in the back of his van, sleeping next to it and calling it his baby. Later, he removed the tips of the fingers and jaw from the body in an attempt to avoid identification. Her body remained in his vehicle for weeks. In the summer months, Howell abducted, assaulted, and murdered several residents in the larger Connecticut area. He lured them into his van with a proposition, detained them with duct tape, and assaulted them before ending their lives. Janice Roberts, Diane Cusack, and Nilsa Arizmendi were attacked in June and July of 2003. Mary Jane Menard was a 40-year-old mother of 2 from Waterbury. She had been abused as a child and turned to alcohol to numb the pain. However, she found sobriety as she was starting her family, but became addicted to painkillers following back surgery. It was a slippery slope that quickly led to the street, and there she began to use heroin. MJ, as she was known to her friends and family, began work as a substance abuse counselor, working again to reclaim her own sobriety. In October 2003, Howell picked up MJ in Waterbury with a solicitation. A witness later recalled Menard waved her down from the passenger window of a blue van at a stop sign, and she introduced a heavy-set white man named Bill. MJ had relapsed after an extended bout of sobriety, and her addiction had put her in that van. It would be a fatal mistake. Howell assaulted the woman for several days before disposing of her body with the others. Just a week later, he would target Joyvelyn Martinez on October 10th in East Hartford and bury her among the others. The 7 confirmed victims of Howell were discovered behind a strip mall 15 miles southwest of Hartford, Connecticut. Howell referred to his dump site as his garden. 3 bodies were discovered in 2007 and the remainder were uncovered in 2015. There is a clear similarity in victimology and MO. Howell targeted sex workers in downtown Waterbury, all of whom had drug habits. He preferred strangulation, but sometimes resorted to blunt force, and he used a vehicle in the attacks, later relocating the bodies. He was familiar with the area, and he even grew up near the dump site. In an interview, Howell refuted any involvement in the murder of Jessica Muskus. Investigators tested her DNA against the blood evidence from his van and determined the 2 were not a match. Additionally, Howell was very forthcoming to his former bunkmate, readily confessing to the 7 murders to which he was convicted. This level of directness suggests that if Howell was responsible for additional victims, he would have readily claimed them due to some sickening sense of pride. Regardless, many still believe he is responsible for more than he claims. Route 8 continues its long, dark stretch into the Connecticut forest, connecting small manufacturing towns that have been hit hard by the opioid crisis. Blacktop grids where sex workers don't even bristle at the stories of the women in the woods. The worst thing to do in the Forgotten Valley is forget. The perpetrator or perpetrators of these crimes may be out there now, waiting off Route 8.